Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, and good morning to our speakers in the United States. My name is Crystal Norman. I'm the Deputy Public Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Embassy in Lisbon, and it is my pleasure to be with you all here today. Thank you so much for coming and taking time out of your day to discuss this really important topic that the Embassy and the United States government cares so much about. This is supporting and empowering students with disabilities. The United States government remains committed to empowering and supporting and inspiring people from all different types of backgrounds. And we wanted to focus particularly on the topic of diversity and inclusion and how we can continue to uplift and advocate for underrepresented groups. We see the disabled community as so integral and so important to the work that we're doing in terms of outreach, in terms of our relationships with all types of students, and in our effort to make sure that we are promoting access and access to all the resources and exchanges and opportunities that we have available. So we know that October was Disabilities Awareness Month, and we had lots of programming. So inspired by a meeting that we had at the State Department called Destigmatizing Invisible Responsibilities, as well, Destigmatizing Invisible Disabilities, excuse me, as well as another program that we did here when the Assistant Secretary for Education and Cultural Affairs, Marie Royce, visited Portugal. We did a briefing on how US government funded exchanges promote diversity and inclusion. And we met a really great disabilities rights activist that reminded us that we need to do more and we could do more in this space to support students with disabilities, to bring in experts who can share their insight and resources so that we can all be better allies and advocates for the community. So we wanted to put together this program, and it's really great because we've, as an embassy, we've supported dance programs, bringing in American choreographers who have worked with local disability rights organizations to support students and inspire and empower them through the arts. And so it's great to focus this conversation on teachers and educators and how we can better support students with disabilities, inspire them, empower them, and support them on their journey to accessing all the opportunities that are available to them, especially in higher education. So it is my pleasure, in the spirit of International Education Week, and in our effort to not only talk about these issues when the convenient month comes around, but 365 and part of our Diversity 365 campaign, I'd love to introduce you to our two speakers who we have on the line. One is Ashley Holben. She is the program specialist for the nonprofit Mobility International USA, MIUSA, and for over 10 years, Ashley has supported the U.S. Department of State sponsored project, the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange. And this effort is to promote the participation, representation, and leadership of people with disabilities in international exchange. So thank you, Ashley, for joining us today. We'll hear more from Ashley just in a moment. Our other panelist is Rita Pinéu. Anna is a 2010 Fulbright alumni, so that's actually one of our flagship academic exchange programs. And she's currently a deaf and hard of hearing specialist. After a year's working as an education specialist for the European Commission at the European Commission at their early childhood centers, she returned to the United States to continue her journey in deaf education at the Weingarten Children's Center, where she has been working as a teacher on site and itinerant, as well as a language therapist for children 0 to 5. So please join me in a warm welcome for those two. Ashley and Anna, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you so much for having us here.
Yes, no, thank you so much for coming. I also wanted to mention before we get into the panelists that the format of today's session will have each of our panelists talk a little bit about their work, some of the insights they want to share. Then we're going to go into some follow-up questions that I'll be moderating. And then, we want to hear from you. This is a session that's supposed to be supporting you and empowering you. So because of that, I'd love to leave lots of time for questions. And afterwards, I'll be sharing some resources, including some videos that I wanted to show, but in the interest of time, we'll save that for the follow-up, as well as additional opportunities to discuss international education and our exchange programs that the embassy will be organizing. I did just want to share my screen for just a second because I wanted to show, I wanted to show a flyer for an upcoming program that we do have. That program is actually called "What Does the Future Hold for International Higher Education? A Conversation with Educators in Greece, Portugal, Spain, and the United States." This program will be on November 30th, and it's going to be an opportunity for us. You can see one of the panelists is Daniel Trasa, and he is the dean for the Nova Business School. And it's just going to be talking about, in this new COVID era, what does the future hold for international higher education? Another conversation that's so important to the work of educators, not only in Portugal, but around the world. And we're really fortunate to be working with our US Study Abroad office to hold this conversation. So with that, let me stop sharing and get back to our panelists. With that, I'd love to turn it over to first Ashley from Mobility International USA. She comes, Mobility International USA is based in Eugene, Oregon. As many of you know, our ambassador, Ambassador Glass, is from Oregon. So we're super proud to have her here and would love to hear Ashley's insights on the work that she's been doing and her organization has been doing to support the disabled community. Ashley?
Yeah, thank you so much, Crystal, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today. I really appreciate the invitation to come talk a little bit about Mobility International USA. And I'm really excited that this event is in honor of International Education Week and that it's looking at disability as part of these conversations around diversity and inclusion, because I think that's a really important aspect of diversity. And just going by a lot of the events through the State Department, I think they're really trying to demonstrate that. And actually, one case in point is the project that I work on at Mobility International USA. So we're a nonprofit organization. We're dedicated towards empowering people with disabilities through leadership and their rights around the world. So we work with this global network of, our CEO, who's a disabled woman herself, she thinks of it as a global disability family. And so she's really interested in creating this worldwide network of people with disabilities who are actually leaders and who are thriving, empowering one another, empowering themselves, and also their allies, and trying to build this global disability family in that way. But I will also say that one project that MIUSA is well known for, we started out with doing international exchange programs, usually short-term programs, to try to build the leadership capacity of people with disabilities coming from countries around the world, as well as people with disabilities based in the US going abroad. And so the goal of those short-term programs is usually to, how can we get people with disabilities to meet their counterparts in other parts of the world? How can they learn strategies from one another to advance the rights in their countries and among their communities? How can they gain skills, leadership skills like independent living or public speaking or volunteering? There's this kind of perception that people with disabilities you have to help them. And so how do we turn that on its head? And how do we put people with disabilities in positions where they're contributing to their communities? So that is kind of what MIUSA is known for. One of our signature exchange programs that we've been doing for a long time now is one focused on disabled women leaders. So that's been one of our signature programs. We call it WILD. If you ever hear us talking about WILD, that's what that is. And then another program that we've been doing ongoingly in coordination with the US Department of State is assisting with high school exchange programs, notably the Future Leaders Exchange Program and the Youth Exchange and Study Program, the Flex and Yes scholarship programs, which have been recruiting students with disabilities as part of this larger scholarship opportunity. And so one thing that MIUSA does is provide resources and, well, first of all, we provide a short-term leadership opportunity for the scholarship students who have disabilities to learn about, you know, while they're in the United States, what are their rights as students with disabilities? How can they really thrive as leaders? And also we want to just expose them to all of the really exciting things that people with disabilities can do while they're in the United States that maybe they didn't know was an option for them. But one thing that MIUSA has become more known for within the last few decades, and actually this is an anniversary year for us, is the US Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Exchange program decided, how can we make sure that people with disabilities are represented and fully participating in all of the range of our exchange programs, whether it's Fulbright or these high school exchange programs, but also like in the broader sense of international exchange that's happening between the US and other countries, whether it's a university study abroad program or the Peace Corps or any kind of volunteer or teacher program. And so that's where this project, the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, comes in. It's kind of a mouthful, so if I say NCDE, that's what I'm referring to. And this is a project, again, we're a small team, but we're really dedicated to developing some resources that can benefit, we kind of serve a lot of different audiences. So one is people with disabilities will contact us and say, hey, I heard that, you know, this international exchange thing, that sounds pretty great. How can I be part of it? Is that something I can do? And so we want to first get the word out to the disability community that international exchange is absolutely something that is an option for you. You should think about how it can enrich your life on a personal basis and also maybe launch your career trajectory. Unemployment is a big focus in the disability community. That's a big topic of conversation. And so we like looking at these opportunities that international exchange can present to really enhance those employability skills. Another audience that reaches out to us are folks that implement international exchange programs. And for them, sometimes they're reaching out because maybe they just had someone with a disability disclose in the application process and they're getting ready to have this exchange program. They want to know, how can we accommodate this participant who has a disability? Other times they might reach out to us before that and say, hey, we just want to make sure that we're inclusive from the start. So wherever folks are at, we definitely welcome them to get in touch with us. And then also, of course, we have parents contacting us, other folks involved in the disability community, asking us what are these different opportunities. And so some of the main methods of services that we offer are just, first of all, just one-on-one communication over email or phone or Skype or whatever we can do to serve you or reach you. And then a big resource is on our website where we offer tip sheets on a lot of different subjects. Some of the ones that people find helpful are disability specific tip sheets, like, or tip sheets that are specific to a type of accommodation. So maybe it's someone who wants to know, how do you bring service dogs when you travel to another country? Or, you know, if I have a learning disability, how can I make sure that can I get the same kinds of extended testing time that I get in my country when I go abroad? So it's kind of questions like that. And then one of my favorite things that we do as a service is get a chance to interview international exchange alumni with disabilities about their experiences. And so we have a pretty big library of personal stories by international travelers with disabilities. If we have time, as Crystal mentioned, we might show a short video at the end where you'll hear from the perspectives of exchange alumni with disabilities, which is really important. So I would really encourage you to read at least some of these stories. I'll be putting together a few links to share afterwards as well. But there's really such a diversity of people with different types of disabilities, going on all different types of exchange programs from study to volunteer to teaching. And so we're really excited whenever we have a chance to learn about those stories and then also find new fun ways of sharing them. So I have a trivia question for folks, and you can let me know in the chat window. First of all, you might have heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And what I want to know is this is an anniversary year for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I was wondering, does anybody want to guess what anniversary it is? How many years has the Americans with Disabilities Act been around as of 2020? Does anyone want to type their guess into the chat window? Do you think it's 10 years, 5 years, 50 years? I'm looking at the chat window, not seeing any guesses. So I must have stumped you. How about Anna or Crystal? Do you want to guess? See, Ricardo's guessing 100 years. All right, it's a little less than 100 years. I'll give you a hint.
Yeah, I actually know the answer, so I'm gonna give some other people an opportunity. Oh, there we go, 1587.
Those are good guesses. I'll give you another hint. It's between 15 and 87. All right, so I'll give you the answer. 2020 is actually the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so one thing, if you follow U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs activities, as I'm sure you do in order to have found this webinar, you've probably been seeing a lot of really great articles and coverage and media from the State Department about international exchange alumni with disabilities having participated in Fulbright or a whole range of international opportunities. And our project NCDE has been around almost roughly that time. But we used to say that our project is dedicated to increasing the participation of people with disabilities in international exchange, but I actually kind of think we've modified that, to not just increasing participation, but also the quality of experiences and making sure that people with disabilities aren't just there, but they're really engaging, they're getting all of the same opportunities and benefits that non-disabled people are getting when they participate in these really life-changing programs. And so I'd be happy to say more, and I do have more to say, but I also want to just check in with our host and my co-panelists to see if maybe if I should take a break and continue on after we've heard from Anna as well.
Absolutely, Ashley. Thank you so much for that overview. And yeah, we are so excited to be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the ADA. Such an important act. And I think, in terms of diversity, inclusion, and equity, such a major step for the United States that, we continue to share with other countries that are looking at ways that they can improve accessibility for all. So so glad that you brought that up, and the trivia is great. Yeah, with that, I will, I'm sure there's lots of questions about your experiences and the great work that your organization is doing. But we'll have plenty of time for that and more follow-ups during the question and answer. Thank you for your contributions. I'd love to invite Anna to share a little bit about her work, her experience on an exchange program, and some of the initiatives that you continue to do to support the community. Anna?
Thank you so much, Christy. So I am from Portugal. I'm currently living in California. I am a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing here, currently certified to work with students anywhere from 0 birth all the way to 21 years of age. Currently, I'm working at a nonprofit, non-public school called Weingarten Children's Center that takes children 0 to 5. It's a special education school focused on listening and spoken language. That means that children who come really focus on maximizing the use of their hearing equipment, like hearing aids and cochlear implants. And then we do early intervention services in an intensive way. And the goal is to mainstream all of these students to public school districts all around California, actually. So it's really important to get these families on time. when I started my career, I remember being young and just being fascinated, looking at TV and seeing people using sign language and those interpreters in the little corner of your TV screen. And I was like, I want to do that. This is what I want to support and do. But I didn't know what to do with my career. So I actually became a clinical psychologist and earned a BA with the University of Lisbon. I took several sign language courses out of my own interest, and I was lucky enough to be offered a position with the Portuguese Association of the Deaf at the time. And they had developed a professional integration training program for youth, deaf youth, that actually were dropping out of school. And so this was a real shock to me to see 17, 18-year-olds, 20-something-year-olds dropping out of school, extremely frustrated with the Portuguese public school system. And I didn't understand why. And when they came to us, they don't view themselves as disabled. They view themselves as a cultural minority with their own very rich and complex sign language. But in practical terms, then what I was seeing is that they lack the skills that would enable them either to pursue further education or to find a job and start their own career. So they were in between very two hard places. They wanted to have a very bright life, but they had a severe impact in reading and writing and literacy skills. Most of them, it's important for you to get this number. Most of deaf and hard of hearing people read at the 3rd or 4th grade level. So literacy, these impacts, right? Because if you can't read, you can't access information. If you can't access information, you have limitations in your life, professional and personal. So we did training programs at the Portuguese Association, and we placed them within companies to learn a trade, and our integration rate was very high. Companies usually after 2-3 years of paid internships hire them, and they develop lots of skills. But still, they couldn't catch up to that literacy gap towards typically hearing peers. And I was shocked. I was like, why are they reading and writing skills so low? What's happening in other grades further back in education that is like making these a disability when it shouldn't be? So earning a Fulbright scholarship was really the change point in my life. It allowed me to travel to the US and to actually become a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing, because I couldn't do that in Portugal, but in the US, you can get a certification at a master degree level and earn the professional credential that lets you work. So besides like earning Fulbright, besides broadening horizons and helping me meet so many people related to education, language development, curriculum development, it really allowed me to focus on what I wanted, which was literacy, reading and writing for deaf and hard of hearing children across a range of grades in public schools. I had colleagues who were themselves deaf and hard of hearing, and they came from different backgrounds, and they wanted to take that leadership position and contribute back to the field. Like, if I'm deaf and I know what I went through in school, I want to make a difference to other deaf and hard of hearing kids. So that was amazing. When I chose, thanks to Fulbright, when I got to choose the American university I wanted to attend, there are several choices. You know, Gallaudet University is world famous for their deaf studies program. You have Boston University, very strong in deaf ed, but one of the only, if not the only university in the USA to offer a very comprehensive program was Columbia University, Teachers College in New York. That university makes sure that every single graduate of the deaf education program is trained to work with any kind of student and family that has deafness or is deaf and hard of hearing. So you do have to learn sign language and become proficient and knowledgeable about the blocks, the roadblocks, the difficulties those people face who are signers, and what do they need to have a successful education in a public classroom. Then you had to know other people who use another mode of communication called cued speech, which is based on speech reading with hand cues. And then you had to learn how to maximize integration of students who didn't sign, who didn't cue, but who used their listening equipment, their listening skills, and spoken language. So they don't sign, they are oral. But that doesn't mean that because they're wearing devices, you're going to throw them in a classroom and hope that they will thrive educationally. That's not possible without accommodations. And so the program was comprehensive, and we got to choose then later on which student teaching we wanted to do. I was lucky enough to work with deaf students from all walks of life, all communication modes. I worked in typical schools for the deaf, who use sign language only, and then reading and writing English through print alone, the same way we are teaching in Portugal, called a bilingual bicultural approach. I was lucky enough to work with students who were fully mainstream, who were in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and who were using either listening and spoken language, and they were in regular classrooms with their peers. But then the teachers needed additional training. These students needed special accommodations to be on an equal footing in the classroom, right? And technology support, and a lot of self-advocacy skills to really thrive. And so I ended up right now, I'm doing early childhood education. I had a kind of Benjamin Button professional journey, and I just kept going backwards and backwards, from working with youth and young adults in their teens and 20s back to like mainstream students in like middle school, high school, and following them up in the mainstream, and then going back to early childhood education and really catching those kids with deafness, which is an invisible disability. I see it more as a difference than a disability, but and really focusing on those students. Parents are lost when they're given the diagnosis, my kid is deaf. They don't know what to do. And just putting a hearing aid or a cochlear implant is not going to change the needs that they have. They have been language deprived for some amount of time that has a very severe impact on their language knowledge and then reading and writing. And so we need to focus on early intervention services for these families, catch them in the newborn hearing screenings, and then really provide coaching to the families to be the teachers of their own child, and then have very intensive early intervention programs. Again, deaf people can have a very fulfilling, amazing professional lives. They can be leaders in their field. And this is what we're trying to do at Weingarten. We have very strong family involvement. We support students who leave us and are already in the mainstream school. So we do lots of teacher education. We monitor the technology, the FMs that they wear to hear better in the classroom. We encourage students to use advocacy skills and train them on that. We have alumni panel, we have community education programs, and we have alumni basically coming back and volunteering. And for parents and families, it's so important to see, wow, my child can achieve that in the future. They can take a degree, they can take a master's degree, they can like write books, they can become experts in this field and so many other fields, and they're so impressed and they have a look in the future, and that gives them hope. So that is it from me. Let me know if you have any questions.
Yes, no, Anna, that's great. Thank you so much for that overview. It's exactly what we needed, and a great compliment to, I think, the work that Ashley's doing as well. So just fantastic to have you both here. So now we're going to go to the question and answer part, and I'd ask if people could put their questions in the chat, and then we're going to have Ricardo let me know when we have a question, and he'll be able to share it with our panelists. But while we get, you've shared a lot of information, and so while we get the questions coming, I'd like to start with the question. And in the absence of, I know there's some great stories captured in the videos that we were going to play, but just wanted to know personally if you could share one inspiring story from a talented student that you've come across that has really overcome tough challenges and really thrived. despite obstacles that they may have faced, he or she may have faced growing up, and just trying to get access to some of these opportunities and resources. So I'll start with Ashley, because I know I've watched the MIUSA video, and I've seen some really incredible stories. So wanted to see just personally, kind of in your experience and your work, what was that story that stood out for you?
Yeah. Well, I'll share a specific one and a general one, but in general, I think the stories that really stand out to me and that are a testament to the power of international exchange are the people with disabilities who they work so hard to jump through all these hoops to go on their international exchange programs, whether it's like trying to deal with language proficiency tests that aren't accessible, or trying to access the application that's not accessible, or whatever it might be, or just, maybe they don't have those role models like the ones that Anna is trying to make sure that people have. And yet they still strive for it, and they make it happen. They have this exchange experience. Some of it goes really well, some of it not so much. But what really moves me is when they return to their countries, learning about the types of changes that they want to make for people with disabilities in their communities. And it's not, not all people with disabilities want a career in disability rights or disability advocacy, but some of them do. And some of them want it in either a personal capacity or professional capacity. But I've heard of people going to their countries, trying to recruit more people with disabilities to participate in the same exchange program or a different one. I love that. Some of them are trying to make changes like infrastructure, like for example, one woman who came on a MIUSA exchange program while she was here in Eugene, Oregon, she had the experience of riding a wheelchair accessible bus. And that was a new experience for her, because where she was from, if you wanted to go out of your house as someone who uses a wheelchair, you kind of have to have some connections to make that happen, or you have to really find some creative ways to do that. But she really loved the experience of riding the bus independently. And when she went back, she and her community of disability rights activists said, we can make this happen in our city. This is a big city we live in. Why don't we have this? And so they actually started putting that in the works. So it's just really exciting what kinds of things international exchange can make happen. I guess another person that I talked to more recently, who actually happens to be deaf, came on an international exchange program through sponsored by the State Department from Indonesia. And in his story, and I asked him to tell his story in sign language. So we have a video of him signing his story on the website, as well as an English transcript for those who don't sign. And he talked a lot about growing up in Indonesia and really being fascinated by the sciences and wanting to advance in, advanced placement, biology, the hard sciences, and kind of hitting a wall there and being discouraged by some of his teachers, like, well, why don't you pursue the languages, or, something that is more fitting for you. But he didn't listen to that. And he knew that, it was discouraging, but luckily there were also people in his life. I believe it was his principal or just another mentor at his school who said, no, we can make this happen. Let's figure this out. And so, for some folks with disabilities, I would say, if you want to know how can we empower more people with disabilities, I would say listen to what their goals are. Don't just, dismiss something just because you haven't seen it happen or you can't picture it in your mind. Try to help them find role models. Try to be that person in their life who says, yes, you can do this. We'll figure it out. And anyway, he ended up studying in the United States, and he's still here, really advancing in his studies and really trying to create, again, an environment of a stronger community for more people in the deaf community and the disability community. So I'll make sure to include both of those links when we send some follow-up resources.
Oh, that's great. No, thank you so much for sharing. That's fantastic. And love to see people just, get out there and just say, you know what, we can make a change. Let's do it. Anna, would you like to share, a quick story of an inspiring student? We do have our first question, but we'd love to hear, one that's really kind of stuck with you.
Okay, just putting out there, in general terms, I am so impressed with all the students. I've seen students trying to catch up with language and become like spoken language users in very few years. And I've seen students who learn musical instruments, participate in orchestras, bands, and even choral groups. So that has been absolutely extraordinary, to the point of technology and early childhood education that allows them to follow up their dreams and do anything they want to do. A specific case that really is dear to my heart is a student who actually came from Uganda, Africa. And she came to the USA thanks to a program that allows for some children around the world to come and get cochlear implants, being sponsored for that effect, and then doing some rehabilitation services. Her family had to be split. She came with the father while the mother stayed back home with the other children. And she spent 2 years alone with her dad, working intensively in language therapy, listening skills, and she became an amazing student in kindergarten, and then they had the plans to go back to their home country. So we really wanted to make sure that from a classroom of 6, because classrooms in listening and spoken language are very specialized and we need to do noise reduction, everything. And so from a classroom of 6, she was going back to a classroom of 100 in her country. And what would that look like for her? And so we made sure that she transitioned first to a regular education classroom in the US, in Massachusetts, with around like 20 to 30 students. And she became very strong with self-advocacy. We followed her with itinerant services. And when she went back to Uganda with her family, she was such a strong student. And her family actually decided to start their own school in Uganda for oral education of deaf and hard of hearing students. So that is just,
yeah, no, that's amazing. Wow. Again, another example of people just saying, seeing a challenge, seeing an issue with access, and really being proactive and just doing it. Oh, that's so great. Thank you, Anna, for sharing that. So I'm loving seeing all the positive comments, so grateful for hearing from you, Anna, and Ashley, and your work, and congratulations. So definitely you're hearing a lot of love from people in Portugal about your work. So thanks for sharing your stories. We did have one question, someone asking if there are checklists for supporting children who are attending schools. I guess a checklist of, best practices that might be available for students with certain needs that might be helpful for educators in the field.
mm-hmm.
Anna, would you like to, or Ashley, whoever? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is Ashley. I'll just say briefly, on our website, we do have some disability-specific checklists for, and they're kind of designed not so much for school children necessarily, but more for international exchange participants. But I think that they could still potentially be adapted for your purposes, but they're kind of designed to try to create a discussion to really get at some of the nuance and some of the specific ways in which the person with the disability kind of moves around in their environment, kind of what works best for them in different situations as far as types of accommodations might be useful. And then kind of to supplement that checklist, that it's more of a questionnaire really. To supplement that, we kind of have some guidance, like if they respond this way, then this, you might want to consider doing this alternative, and then also some alternative methods to that as well. So I'll make sure to include that. Anything to add to that, Anna?
So in the deafness area, there are a lot of resources out there, and I can share some with a follow-up. There are, so each deaf student in the US that is in public education system has an individualized educational plan, IEP. And teachers and schools need to follow the recommendations of that IEP. There are certain accommodations, certain things that have to be provided for those students in the classroom. And that really depends on the mode of communication. It might go from interpreters being present in the classroom to captions, to flexible seating in the classroom, or use of certain technologies like an FM system. So there are a lot of resources there and things that can be followed up. There are other checklists that, for example, assess students' school readiness to transition from early intervention services to mainstreaming services. And there are kind of checklists that guide teachers and families. Sometimes we have children ready to transition after early intervention at 3 years of age. Sometimes they will transition at 5 when they go to kindergarten. Others will have to go to special day classes in public schools and then get support that maybe that's the path they'll stay on, or maybe they'll then move forward to a more inclusive, less restrictive environment. So it really depends, but there are a lot of checklists, there's a lot of materials, and I'll try to share some in the follow-up.
Great, thanks, Anna. So thank you to Luis for that question. Maria Jose Zaragoza had some interesting insights, not a question, but just talking about how deaf students are integrated in mainstream schools and some of the resources available and the types of sign language they learn. So thank you, Maria, for sharing that. Our next question comes from Helena. She'd like to ask for advice when we have disabled students attending the same lessons as other students because the school doesn't have other ways to teach them. Any thoughts on that, Ashley? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is Ashley. When I was reading that question, it kind of reminded me of a resource that I wanted to share. We've been talking, a lot of the examples we've talked about are related to deaf and hard of hearing students during this webinar, but I just wanted to also, I think I forgot to mention, in our work, and then also the State Department, disability really encompasses like a really broad range. Crystal also mentioned how that also includes non-apparent disabilities or disabilities that are not visible. So I wanted to acknowledge that as well. But one resource that I'm really excited about here in the United States over the last several years is Think College. It's one word, Think College. And this is a network of people devoted to trying to get people with intellectual disabilities into higher education. And so, you know, this intellectual disabilities and also developmental disabilities. So this might include people with Down syndrome or similar intellectual disabilities. It might include people on the autism spectrum or other developmental disabilities. And so it's just really exciting to see this network growing of colleges and universities all across the United States that are trying to find ways to, you know, bring students with these types of disabilities who historically have been excluded from education, even below the higher education level, and how to get them into a classroom setting alongside peers without disabilities. So, you know, you say attending the same lessons as the other students, that's exactly what's happening. And I just think that's really exciting because I think not a lot of people have pictured that or have seen that up close. And, but it's kind of this growing movement. And if you check out Think College, you can see a lot of examples of students who are having access not only to the same classrooms, but they're also getting the college experience. So living in dorms, attending events, joining clubs. And, you know, in some cases, the accommodation might be having kind of a personalized support person whose job it is to try to take some of these concepts and try to put them in a format that is accessible to the student on an individual basis, or it might be some outside tutoring or some modifications to the tests or the assignments. But whatever it is, it's the end result is inclusion, but without, you know, really significantly changing the purpose of the lesson. So I look to that just as a really great example of some innovative ways of teaching and bringing education to underserved communities.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for that. I wanted to give a few shout outs. Alberto Gaspar, I see, is on the line from API, the Association of English Teachers in Portugal. So thank you for joining us. Also, we have our leadership exchanges specialist, Madalena Veloso, on the line. We have Teresa Rock, who worked with Ricardo organizing this panel. So thank you so much for both of your efforts. Also wanted to shout out Ricardo, who is our alumni coordinator and always looking at ways to integrate our alumni voices. And so Ricardo actually had a question. What advice would you give to a Portuguese high school student who dreams of studying in a US college? I think that is a great inspirational question. Who has some thoughts on that? Anna?
Wow, that's a tough one. There's so much there. It's totally possible. Just research, find out which programs can support that interchange, including Fulbright and all the other opportunities that are there. Study hard. Entrance and acceptance to US universities is grade-based, and you have to pass some exams to show mastery of English skills, reading and writing, and also knowledge, and try to see which universities have a program that really interests you. And sometimes that's not just about the program, but the people who work there. Look at the professors, what they're doing, what kinds of research, and that way it will really help you, assist you in choosing the right university for you, for yourself. You also have to become more financial literate than I was back then. Scholarships are great, but they're still limited, and education in the US is unfortunately extremely expensive. Many students here in the US have to take loans to pursue higher education. Fortunately, we have more supports through scholarships in Portugal, but you do have to understand the costs involved in paying for credits and tuition in the US. But it's just amazing. You'll make international students for life, and your horizons will broaden, and you'll grow bigger than yourself.
Oh, that's so great, Anna. Thank you. Ashley, what would you say to a student trying to study at a US college?
Well, just a little bit more specific to a student with a disability, just one of the questions that we get from people outside the US with disabilities who want to study is, first of all, I have a disability, can I study in the United States? And then usually is there a certain school that I have to go to? And so just kind of acknowledging some of those questions, I would say to a student, yes, absolutely. And I would also say that there are universities and colleges, some that have kind of reputations for maybe being more of like offering really fantastic services or community that might appeal to people with disabilities, but know that, again, because of that Americans with Disabilities Act, which, despite the name, does not only apply to Americans, it also applies to people who are in the United States from wherever in the world they are. That laws like that help protect people with disabilities to make sure that they have the same access. So no matter which college or university you go to, know that the ADA is on your side, and that the school should be able to provide you with what you need in order to access your classes and really thrive in your school choice. So I would say if you're interested in disability community, or if you're interested in like which schools have the best wheelchair racing, or which campuses have large populations of students who use sign language, definitely consider those factors. But I think also be sure that you're not limiting yourself to those institutions if your passion is truly with maybe a certain vocation or academic area that another school specializes in. So try to find some creative ways to open yourself up to lots of different opportunities.
No, that's great. So I've asked everybody to share your school name, all of our educators on the line. I see some friends from Azambuja here. So great, and I'd love to see who else is on the line and what schools you're representing. Luis, thank you, Luis, for your questions and your enthusiasm. He also had another question. about pictograms. And I think somebody, oh, I think Anna, okay, you already asked.
Tried.
You responded. Okay, great, great, great. So that's perfect, because we're just trying to help each other. So I see that we have a Zambuja on the line, a Grupamento de Escolas de Santiago de Cacém, Friends of the Embassy on the line, Escola Secundária de Maria Manuel de Fonseca, Shane Academies in Algés, Escola Gabriel Pereira Évora. That's so awesome. I'm so glad to have you all here. I also wanted to know from your experience, you know, in terms of language, I think, you know, language has evolved so much. And I know that, you know, in talking about diversity and inclusion, language is important, and how we, you know, promote access and inclusiveness through the language that we use and the respect that we use by asking about that language. Would love to get your thoughts on, you know, I mean, I know there's not kind of one end all be all phrase for everybody, but what might people do, or what questions might they ask to make sure that they're being respectful and referring to people from the disabled community?
That's a great question. And actually, you know, on US campuses, this can just help provide some insight as to the range of that question. But on US campuses, most of them have some kind of department that is designed to ensure that students have any disability related accommodations they might need. But it's kind of funny because, you know, a lot of the offices kind of go between being called Disability Resource Center. Some find Disability Resource Center is great because, you know, the students with disabilities know that that's what they do. Others are aware that maybe some students who have disabilities but don't necessarily identify as disabled or as a person with a disability, well, we're going to call ours the Accessible Education Center or something similar to that. And so that just kind of goes to show that there is quite a range of students, some of whom have that disability identity. They want to connect to other students with disabilities. They think of themselves as a culture, community. Others, they might think of it as something that is just like, you know, an aspect that they have to deal with. Some of them, it's not until they actually get to college that they start thinking of it as like an identity. And like I've talked to a lot of students like that, and they're like, man, I used to think that I used to not want to talk about this. I used to be, you know, afraid to talk about this, but I've met all these people now. And now I think of it as like, I'm part of this, I have this new identity, I have this new community. So that's really exciting, but not all students are there yet. And so I think where educators or allies can best serve them is, you know, I think when you talk about diversity, say the word disability at some point in that discussion so that they know that it's safe, that you're thinking about that.
Right.
I think too often, like some folks kind of gloss over it or say like all abilities or whatever, to the point where students mean, oh, you probably weren't talking about my type of diversity or my, you know, about disability. So I would say just make it, put it on the menu, put it on the table, let people know that you're open to talking about it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think for us at the embassy, you know, we definitely want to center voices of the disabled community, but also look for ways to integrate always. You know, if we're talking about women entrepreneurs, looking at, you know, women entrepreneurs with disabilities, if we're talking about, you know, people from outside of the capital in kind of, you know, more isolated, more rural areas, you know, how can we engage the disabled community in those locations? So definitely appreciate your advice and your, you know, your counsel on how you can use the best language, but also know that by using some language or not using some language, you might be inadvertently excluding people when you want them to come to the table. So that's really, really important. Anna, did you have something to add on that, on language?
Just that in general terms, I think there has been a movement of different groups, different people with different disabilities saying, listen, don't call us like handicap, don't say the word handicap, and don't say deficiency. Don't say hearing impairment, say deaf. because that's what we are. We are deaf. Don't say visual impaired, say blind. Those are the correct terms and addresses as such. So I think there is a movement for accuracy in those terms, like we're not lacking something. Don't talk about impairment, but say blind or deaf, because those are identities. And so treat us as such. And for the teachers out here who are listening to us today, just think that if you have a student who is deaf, who is ever coming to your classroom, you can expect anything. Yes, you can expect a student who wears devices and hearing aids and cochlear implants, but they might not want that technology on them, and they might be happy with a visual world. You might have students who are fluent signers, and you might have some that know a few signs, but actually they don't have very formalized way of communicating. You might have students who have never seen a sign in their whole life, and they just use listening and spoken language. And you will have students who have more speech differences or speech impediments than others. That reflects in no way in terms of knowledge or intelligence. So each student in deafness will be different. And do you understand that it's a very political field? There are very strong opinions about how these students should be raised and how they should communicate. Should they be signing? Should they be speaking? And this has been a controversy for over 100 years, right? I think there is a movement to saying, let's give each child as a unique individual and each family what they need to thrive, being skewed speech, sign language or oral language, it doesn't matter. It's whatever works for you. And that's just the message of diversity I wanted to leave. And I hope to see that diversity increasing in Portugal.
Oh, that's great. I think that's a great way to end it. You know, this has been such an interesting conversation, and I've definitely come away with some new insight and also some new optimism, you know, just about how hopeful the world is when we make it a more accessible place for everyone. So with that, I'd like to thank both of you for coming and participating in this panel. It's been fascinating, and, you know, linking all of this expertise and positive energy on both sides of the Atlantic is really the spirit of the US-Portugal friendship. So we appreciate you sharing today and being willing to answer the questions. Ashley Holben from MI USA, and also Rita Pinéu from the Weingarten Children's Center. It was a pleasure having you both. I'd also like to give a special thanks to our teachers, our educators who are on the front lines, taking care of our children, inspiring them, empowering them, supporting them, especially during this difficult time. We know it's been challenging. We applaud you, we appreciate you, and we thank you for continuing every day to do the tough work of being an educator and looking for ways to continue to educate yourselves, to continue to make your classrooms positive, inclusive, and a really supportive atmosphere for all of our students. And also I also wanted to remind people that we have a personal commitment to continue this conversation. And I know that there was also some feedback from from our office looking at ways that we can directly connect your organizations with some of the schools and colleges who may reach out to us afterwards, interested in sharing models and best practices. And we are certainly hope that you are interested in doing that, and would love to make those connections so people can stay in touch and continue to learn from you.